Welcome back to The Tangent. Today we have a special guest in the building today, but we'll go ahead and introduce people you already know. Devin's here.
Yo.
Tim's here.
I'm not here.
Well, you think you're not here.
He's not in the building.
Harrison is here.
You can't see me.
Myself, James, and our special guest today is Artie. So today we're going to talk about wrestling, or as we all call it, wrestling.
I don't call it that.
So today we're
You're
going to
just
talk.
a party pooper, alright?
Yeah.
Today we're going to talk on how this whole group kind of got into wrestling. Like, I don't know if Harrison's actually into wrestling or not.
No.
Okay, so Harrison never got into wrestling, but
So,
the rest of us had our own introductions to wrestling.
As you all know, Harrison doesn't like things.
That little blip at the beginning was all I got.
The little blip.
The now you see me or you can't see me or something.
You can't see me. That's the only thing. That's just because he thinks he's John Cena.
All he knows
Anyway,
is John Cena, and that's fair.
so
I guess.
we can start over on the other side of the room. Tim doesn't really remember him getting into wrestling, and I don't really remember showing him wrestling.
Here's what I remember. I remember being a little kid, and me and James playing WWF Royal Rumble on the Genesis.
Okay.
That's how I remember a lot of my childhood.
Yeah.
If that's the way you were kind of introduced, because like, I'm gonna kind of bring up a couple of different points, you know. So.
Yeah, but it was basically that. Like I was a little kid. I remember watching wrestling, and I don't remember a whole lot that happened because it was like the early '90s.
Yeah, that was like
Like
the tail end of the real golden age. Of
yeah,
wrestling.
everything was still brightly colored. And
Yeah.
Gimmicks
you had
were still ridiculous.
right, and like the ropes were still 3 different colors. Like it was still red, white, and blue or whatever.
Were they red? Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
they were red,
Yeah.
white, and blue.
I have no idea.
At certain points.
So
yeah,
well, you need to get older, sir. So
I
that way.
can't see colors anyways.
Oh well.
Yeah, he's colorblind, so he doesn't know that you didn't.
Look, I'm not here to talk about your defects. I'm here to talk about wrestling.
Yeah, if we were to talk about our defects, that's a whole
That's a whole other
episode.
podcast.
That'd probably be like a 3-parter, but that's not the point. Harrison probably wouldn't talk during that one either. But
He's
Yeah, I'm
perfect.
Just call him Kurt Hennig.
That's that's basically what I remember.
Nice.
I remember being a little kid and watching some wrestling. I don't remember anything that actually happened. I remember following some of the wrestling superstars. Like Hulk Hogan had like a TV show that we watched for a reason.
Oh, that was the Thunder.
Yeah,
Thunder in Paradise.
Yeah,
Yeah.
He drove a boat. He's
Such a horrible show. Well, I don't know why we
all I
watched
remember
it.
is super armored mecha boat, and he would drive it over things, and that's
Yeah.
it.
So you
That's-
watched wrestling when it was at its almost most hokey.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, at least it was becoming its most
It was
hokey.
it was the Silver Age Batman of wrestling. It was
Nice.
like, everything was a joke.
It's like-
Nothing made
We
sense.
call that, wasn't that like the tail, like I said, the tail end of the golden age of wrestling,
Right.
like the WWE wrestling eras, if you're talking about
But
eras.
but then I stopped watching wrestling for a number of years until I got into middle school. And I ran into a kid who I ended up being friends with, and he was into wrestling, and his favorite wrestler was Triple H. And I was like, I don't know who the hell this Triple H guy is.
What year were you in middle school? Because if you skipped from like Hulk Hogan to Triple H, I want to know.
2000.
2000.
I was
Okay,
in middle school. Yeah.
that's a fair point to be a fan of Triple H.
Right. So
Well, yeah,
he was a big fan of Triple H.
Him, to be
Um,
honest.
And so I started watching wrestling, and the very first thing that I saw was the night that Stone Cold Steve Austin became the CEO. And yeah, he wore the vest and a tie, and he had a clipboard, and he was telling everybody what to do, and I was like, this dude's a boss. And I just started watching. He became my favorite wrestler for a while.
Yeah, because I
Wild.
don't remember.
Yeah.
Well, what a great episode to just land on. And
Right.
see, yeah.
Yeah. So, Devin, your introduction to wrestling?
This one's probably going to be longer. Just to kind of preface this, I would say me and Artie are like the hardcore fans, which is why we brought
which
Artie
is why
in for
Artie's
this
here
episode.
today.
So mine's going to be a little bit longer and convoluted and all this stuff. I'd say my earliest memories are due to my brother. Kind of prior to me getting into it myself, he, around like 97 and on, my brother was huge into wrestling. So you're looking at Attitude Era when Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock were super big, and on the WCW Nitro side, you got the NWO and Sting. So maybe you know who those people are, maybe you don't.
I remember Sting from the early 90s.
But
you talking about the Surfer Sting?
yeah. Right. Well, see, I knew who Surfer Sting was because, like, both my parents and my brother are huge wrestling fans. And so, like, Sting was my mom's favorite and my brother's favorite.
And mine.
And James's and a lot of other people that I know absolutely love Sting. But, like, I knew him as, like, Crow Sting, Dark Sting, like, 99 and on Sting.
Yeah.
You know, like, the edgy...
His
coming down
contract-
from the rafters or hiding in the rafters Sting.
His contract, that was actually when his contract was like in dispute. So he didn't wrestle for like a year.
Right, yeah.
He just did appearances
And
in the
honestly-
rafters and stuff for a whole year.
It wasn't so
that's
much watching actual wrestling at that point that I remember, like, because my brother is 8 years older than me, and around this time, I'm like toddler to like 4 or 5-ish,
Right.
around the Attitude Era-ish time, which I would say spans from like 97 to like 2001, 2002 maybe.
Yeah, because you get to... What's the next era after Attitude?
Ruthless Aggression.
Yeah, the Ruthless Aggression era.
But, like, at that point in time, I remember action figures. So, like, that
Yeah.
was a huge part of me for getting into wrestling with my brother. I shared a room with him. He's 8 years older than me, so he's a teenager. And he's watching all this Attitude Era stuff, and he's got these action figures, and he's, going through stories, in front of me, just sitting here watching, and he's got, Big Show and like Sting and just doing stuff like that. And then there's also video games, like my brother had several of them, so there was a lot of crossover and
Right.
stuff between that. So like at that point I didn't really understand the whole like what WCW and what WWF at the time was. Like it was all just wrestling to me, and like
Right.
it was like something that like I'll be into it because my brother's into it. But right around the end of the Attitude Era in 2002 was when I became a fan. I remember the biggest reason why it happened so late, or at this point, now I'm like 7, 8 years old, was because we didn't have it on TV. And then SmackDown was moved to My 46, which is a basic TV channel, no
Yeah.
cable, no nothing.
Just needed an antenna.
So, and wrestling god himself, Paul Heyman, was in charge of creative decisions for that show. So that's what immediately drew me in, was turning on SmackDown on a Thursday night. My brother's just like, oh, here, check
And-
this out. Let's watch wrestling now because we can. And like, you got Brock Lesnar, when he actually worked and was
yeah.
like an up and coming star.
Yeah, before he got a hole in his intestines.
Right.
And he was a behemoth too. Like he was
And
one of
you
those.
got-
He was a destructive power when he came in.
you got, Brock Lesnar, Rey Mysterio, and then honestly for me, my all-time 3 favorites are Undertaker, Eddie Guerrero, and Edge. And at that point in time, all 3 of them were on SmackDown, absolutely killing it every week. So that's what really, really, really got me into it, was around that point in time where the Ruthless Aggression Era was just beginning. You had new stars coming in rather than, the stars that I knew, but, they weren't
Right.
really my stars. So honestly, it's kind of funny. Most wrestling fans are like, "Oh, I started because of Stone Cold Steve Austin and The
Right.
Rock."
And,
And
the
like,
thing is, I still
I
remember...
never had a phase where they were even remotely,
Yeah, they were never
because they were gone by the time I really got
right.
into
And,
it.
and when
you know?
I first got into it, it was basically Raw's War was Stone Cold's show. Like that was, he would show up. He was the big star of that show, and it was right around the time that The Rock was getting really, really big, and they basically just handed him SmackDown.
Yeah,
And so it was, Stone Cold would show up for Raw and feud with Triple H, and then The Rock would show up on SmackDown and also feud with Triple H, and then like it was sort of like this weird love triangle where everyone hated each other.
So this is really like after the Monday Night Wars, though.
Yeah,
isn't it?
I mean,
Okay.
2001 is really when the war ended, and like some people might say it's kind of when the Attitude Era ended, but essentially it did continue on until it became a new era, at least in their point of view.
Yeah, their
in
writing,
WWE / wrestling history's point, where it became official. But like in 2001, the ratings war between WCW and WWE ended because WCW got bought by WWE or WWF at the time. Excuse me.
Was it still WWF at that time?
Yes, because it
Yeah.
it was about a year or so after the purchase of WCW that they switched to WWE. But we'll talk about that later
Yes.
because there's actually some really interesting points that I'd like to talk about.
Which is fine.
The whole
We can
switch.
circle back around to that.
But let's go ahead and pass it down.
So yeah, we're gonna go to pass it over to Artie, and he can talk about how he got into wrestling.
Well, kind of like Devin said, if anybody in our age group said it was Hogan or the Attitude Era that got him in, they're a liar, because it'd be almost impossible for us to remember it. But like mine's kind of weird. My dad used to be a fan growing up, so he had like old VCR tapes, and the first wrestling I ever saw was Larry Sabisco cracking coconuts with nunchucks, and I was like, holy crap, this is cool. And then like he had the most strange entrance music, and me and my dad still make fun of it. But then when it went after that, I didn't have cable or anything, so I didn't see. So I knew wrestlers like Rey Mysterio before I knew Hogan. My dad used to always talk about him, but like most of it's just me knowing wrestling was going back and watching old tapes. Like my dad had a friend at his job that would record Raw and WCW pay-per-views for me, and I'd get to go watch them. But like most of it was on Channel 46. Like I started watching it. Ray became my favorite, and then others like going to Walmart, and around me was Movie Gallery. I don't know what it was kind of in everywhere
Like the
else.
Family Video or Blockbuster or whatever.
Yeah,
because they'd have the older events like Survivor Series and WrestleManias and
I forgot they used to do that.
Yeah, we used to go and rent those. Like we would find some older Survivor Series, WrestleManias, Royal Rumbles, and we'd stick them in the VCR and we'd just watch them. I remember watching some old Royal Rumbles.
That's the cool thing. Like I'd say basically from I could be wrong about this, and this is a kind of a generalization. So hopefully I'm not offending any younger wrestling fans, but I feel like from like Artie and I's point on, it was like nobody was that big into wrestling. Like for me, it was like okay, you get your SmackDown and your whatever the else you can find, as much of it as you can find. Like I was going over to my friend's house every Monday because he had cable. I was trying to watch Raw over there. Like, I didn't have internet. I didn't have cable. So I was going to Family Video. I was going to the library. I was going to Blockbuster. I was getting as much of it as I could any way that I could, whenever I could.
It's kind of funny because my first write-up in school was because I was checking the pay-per-view results on the school computer.
Nice.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's funny.
I had a big advantage when I was young because, like I said, I had a bunch of friends that were really into wrestling, and I had more than one friend who was super into wrestling, and some of them were rich. Like they had rich families, so if I wanted to watch like a pay-per-view or I wanted to check out any extra stuff or play all of the video games,
right?
All I had to do was just head over to their house,
right?
And we so like they ran all the pay-per-views. They had all the video games, like all the N64 games, like all the like WCW versus NWO and WrestleMania 2000.
WrestleMania 2000.
WrestleMania
Mercy.
2000 was
They-
the movement. That was
Yeah, so they
that
had
was a great
all of them.
game.
We used to play them all. We used to watch all the events, and we would sometimes go over to each other's houses and try and watch like all of Raw. But since it ended so late, we would have to like run home to catch the rest of it before we went to bed. So like,
Yeah, it was 3 hours long at that point because they all started at 2 hours, and then during the wars, Raw and Nitro went to 3 hours to try to beat the other one.
Well, I remember certain points in time where I'd be at my friend's house watching Raw, and like I would purposefully let myself get in trouble because my bedtime / curfew or whatever was 9 o'clock. Raw goes until 10.
Right.
I didn't give a crap. I'm staying and watching Raw until 10, and
Yeah,
I'll
right.
just get in trouble, And I would do that almost weekly for a couple of months, and then I just told my mom, I'm like, you realize that I'm just going to keep doing this? And she's like, fine, Mondays only.
I eventually got my bedtime moved to after Raw is over,
Right, exactly.
that was it. Like that was the time. Like as soon as Raw was over, it went off.
Yep.
You
I would-
remember on Spike when at about 8:30ish you'd see copyright and everything WWE. When I went back and read why that happened, that's showing that the kid-friendly version was ending. That's why the Katie Vick
Oh,
and
really?
Kane segment was past 8:30 because that's when most kids went to bed.
That's interesting.
Yep.
I
And-
never knew why they did it at certain times, but sometimes
That's
you'll
crazy.
still see them do that.
Oh yeah.
Well, I remember during when I first started watching Raw and Warzone were technically two different shows. So after the end of the first hour, they would show the logo and it was like Raw is over, and then they would head into Warzone, and then at the end of that hour, it would show Warzone was over, and then it would continue until they were done with whatever.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
So now we're going to go to the old guy in the group, and I get to talk about the golden era.
Oh, I thought you meant Harrison.
So I first started watching wrestling because I had a friend who lived like 2 houses down from my grandmother, which we didn't get to see him very often because my dad was in the Air Force, so we moved around a lot. But anytime we go to my grandmother's house, he was the guy I used to hang out with. He was huge into wrestling. He was golden era back in the day when it was the Rockers and Demolition and Hulk Hogan. I got to see the introduction of The Undertaker. Like when he
I'm
first
jealous.
came
Like-
to the ring, his first entrance to the ring, I got to watch. We used to watch it on Saturday mornings because they didn't have this thing on Monday nights, and it was never live. It was
Well,
always
they
pre-recorded.
They still
and-
did a thing on Saturday mornings for a long time.
Oh
didn't
yeah.
they?
Oh, yeah,
Super
so-
Saturday morning main event.
Yeah,
Or
wrestling
Saturday night
was-
main event.
It was Saturday.
I remember being
It
able to
used
wake
to
up
be like
Sunday.
WWE
I'm sorry, Saturday for Saturday morning cartoons, and being
Yeah,
able to catch like a little hour long
Yeah.
WWF show.
It was the Superstars.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
Super
right.
and then
They
it's
had
Sunday Night
Superstars.
Heat too, and
Yeah, they did some stuff, and then periodically we catch these, Friday night main events. So they would run these special events on Friday nights that would come right before a pay-per-view. So they do a bunch of these awesome like matches because back in the day when we started watching, they were all squash matches. They were all the big. They were all the big.
Sorry.
The big wrestlers never wrestled each other. So it was never Hulk Hogan versus Andre the
Yeah,
Giant
right.
on Saturday mornings. It was always Hulk Hogan never wrestled unless it was a pay-per-view.
Yeah.
Andre the Giant never wrestled unless it was a pay-per-view. So the people you would see is like Coco Beware or even the Rockers would come out and squash some random tag team that nobody's ever heard
Well,
of.
that was back in the territory days, so it's like
Right.
the big guys, the big stars would just squash local talents. Every
Exactly.
week,
The only one guy that I always remember, and it was just one of those things that if I say this name, everybody in this room will know who he is the Brooklyn Brawler.
Mm.
Do we know who the Brooklyn Brawler is?
The
Yeah.
most
He's that
famous
wo-
jobber of all time.
Yes. He was never known for anything except for getting squashed. If he was announced into the ring, you know he was going to lose.
right.
yeah, they
And it was
would talk
always
they would
against
talk him up
another
like he was
big
big and
star.
tough, and he
Right.
was a big challenge, but he was just
He'd be out there, to lose.
I
Yeah.
mean, so after I got into that, I did watch that for a long time. I did kind of fade in and out of wrestling. It was never I gave up on wrestling. I was just one of those. I'd watch it when I could,
Yeah.
and I kind of did a sporadic because I liked the actual wrestling aspect, but I wasn't too big on the whole drama and the excess talking and all that stuff that WWF used to do back then. So WCW and NWA used to be what I tended to lean towards, and they used to have shows on like, I think it was like Wednesday nights or Thursday nights on like TBS or TNT or something like that.
Yeah, TNT.
Those were some true, to me, that was some true wrestling, because I mean, you had like the Steiner brothers, you had Lex Luger. I mean, they were in there doing some real things. Sting, obviously, and then Ric Flair, because Flair was in WCW at the time, or NWA at the time. He was the champion. I didn't get
Dusty Rhodes in there probably.
Dusty was in and out.
Occasionally, because he was more
kind
in
of
the back.
He kind of bounced back and forth between the two federations.
Yeah, and
He's
he was
the
always
one guy.
involved creatively backstage a little bit more so at that point in time than he was, in the actual ring.
But then, like, as I got a little older through middle school and in high school, I kind of just it just went away. I stopped. I had no idea what was really going on. When I graduated high school, this puts me at around 98-ish, 97, 98. When I graduated high school, I moved to California. When I moved to California, there was all of a sudden this huge phenomenon called the NWO showed up in WCW, and they were showing these Monday night shows live. And that was Nitro. That was WCW Nitro. And NWO was coming on and interrupting these shows live. And they were WWF wrestlers invading WCW. Now, us as fans didn't know that their contracts had moved over and they were truly WCW wrestlers. But most people that knew these guys, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, we didn't know that they were contracted over to WCW. We all thought they were just WWF wrestlers interrupting. And we didn't know them as Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. We knew them as Razor Ramon and Diesel, or whatever other name Kevin Nash went by at the time. I think he had like 2 or 3.
Big Daddy Cool Diesel.
Yeah, I used to call him Tall Guy with Leather Pants. But,
wasn't he Crush or something like that? Didn't he do... That wasn't Crush?
Him.
He was like something wizard.
Yeah.
WCW.
There was some weird gimmick that he had in WCW before.
That might have been what it was that I'm thinking of. But they came in and they were interrupting these live shows, like beating people up for no reason, and and then the NWO became a thing. Hogan at the time was in WCW.
Right. He had also left WWF and come over. But
Right, and he was still his Hogan, Hulk Hogan, the yellow and red.
The ultimate baby face, the hero.
Right, and like the big thing was when Hogan tried to go against Hall and Nash, all of a sudden the scripts were flipped and all of a sudden Hogan became Hollywood Hulk Hogan, and he dyed his mustache black and he became the heel. And I'm like, Hogan is a heel? What the heck's going on here?
Right.
And
So,
it actually was
to preface
epic.
this for anybody that is hopefully still listening that might not know anything about wrestling, there's a couple of terms that we've talked about that I'm sorry to interrupt you, but like,
No, you're fine. 'Cause
I don't want people to be lost and confused. So first of all, we said squash match like 5 minutes ago. Basically, that just means one person absolutely destroys another person to make that person look stronger.
Right.
So Hulk Hogan versus a nobody, that kind of thing.
Or like the thing that Kane did for like a year and a half.
Yeah, so, you're trying to make somebody look like a big deal, so you just have them completely destroy somebody in a match very quickly.
Goldberg was a great example of that. When
yeah,
he did
the 100
the who's next thing.
Yeah.
Where you just,
And then Jobber is basically that person that's being squashed.
Right.
yeah.
Brooklyn Brawler, the most famous jobber of all time.
Right, where they would talk him up like he was a big deal, and then he would get squashed every time.
Right.
Yep.
And then you got James just mentioned Hogan turning heel, meaning he went from being a babyface, which is the good guy, to a heel, which is the bad guy.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely perfect because that's what they called themselves, the bad guys.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that everybody knew Hogan from WWF, and even in the beginning parts of WCW, as this super, like, take your vitamins.
Yeah,
and
the American hero.
the American hero, and he was the baby face of baby faces back then. I mean, he was it. Like, you listened to him, you know, and all the kids looked up to him, and he was, you know, he was an idol.
Right. He wasn't yelling racial slurs at this point in his life.
No. But when he did the heel turn in WCW
It was
and
huge.
turned and actually started the NWO with Nash and Hall, it was humongous.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, Nitro became a thing, and everybody's like, "Oh my gosh!"
Right.
You know. And then WWF is like, "Well, we got to do something."
Right. So it's
that
kind of perfect that it seems like a theme for a lot of people that knew of wrestling or watched wrestling and kind of fell out at some point before that happened, because that started, or that kicked off the Attitude Era.
right. It kicked
You know,
off the Attitude
it was
Era.
around, 97 was about the start of the Attitude Era, where there was a ratings war. You had WCW on Monday Night Nitro was doing things that were stealing ratings and viewership away
Yeah.
Well,
from
they did that,
Raw.
they did that thing on
For the
WCW where they would read off all the results for Raw because Raw was still
Yeah,
pre-recorded.
like
Yes.
it
And
became.
Nitro
That's
was
what I was
live.
just about to say.
It was
that.
ridiculous, because the reason why it became a war is because, WCW and NWA and whatever was established for a long time.
Oh
you know?
yeah, they had been around for just
But-
as long, if not longer,
But
than WWF.
WWF was still the juggernaut.
Yes.
People were watching Raw more than they were watching anything else. WWE was the juggernaut. And then all of a sudden, WCW Nitro on Monday nights is live. So everything that's happening is happening right then and right there.
Right.
You have WWF guys showing up and beating the crap out of everybody. You got Hogan turning heel and joining these guys and taking over the entire show. And then you got other people rising up to try and face them. You got Goldberg and Sting.
Sting
and,
was the big one.
And
Luger started it.
it started an entire creative storyline that basically resulted in WWF getting their ass kicked in ratings for like 80-something weeks. That's a long time. And so WWE had to respond. And this is what created probably the biggest boom in
Yeah.
wrestling history.
Yeah, definitely.
Where,
There was more
where
viewers.
old fans became fans again,
Yep.
where non-fans became fans for the first time.
Right.
And
you had a lot of kids finally,
yeah.
the adults who had kids that are back into wrestling again, they're bringing their kids and
Yeah.
showing their kids what wrestling is. I mean, it was huge because I used to record, okay, because I would never be home. So I always watched it recorded. So I would be able to record Nitro. No, I recorded Raw, and Nitro came on twice,
Yeah.
almost back
right
to back.
Right after it.
So I come home.
AEW does that sometimes.
I would come home and I would watch the second showing of WCW and watch the recorded of WWE. I wasn't a huge WWE fan because
Right.
my favorite wrestlers were in WCW. Sting, Luger, at the time Eddie Guerrero was in
Yeah.
freaking the cruiserweights were some of my favorite
Yeah,
things to
and
watch.
that
And I've
was-
talked to you about this. I mean, you got what's his name? Jericho, Kid,
Malenko.
Malenko,
Freaking Rey
Ultimo
Mysterio,
Dragon.
Ultimo
Dragon,
Dragon, Too
Hoover
Cold
Tooth.
Scorpio. Yeah.
and then the
There's-
guy who went crazy.
Chris Benoit.
Chris
Benoit, the
Benoit.
guy who went crazy. We'll leave it at that.
I'm not going into that. We're not going to go into that. But that's the only way I remember him. I mean, whether he went crazy or not, it's
Hey,
what
I,
I
would,
would.
I
we
still
knew
remember
who
him as
you
the guy
meant.
with no teeth.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. But I
He
mean,
lost one tooth.
the cruiserweights were my favorite.
that one tooth just took up the majority of his mouth.
Especially the
You're just
lucha,
remembering it wrong.
especially the luchadors, the
Yeah.
Mexican wrestlers that came in and did some of the coolest high flying moves ever done in the ring.
Yeah.
And then that just became a norm. Now everybody does these super high flying moves, but these guys
Yeah,
back
the
in the day
high
were
flyers used to be like a whole category of
yeah,
wrestling.
they were the cruiserweights.
That was
Now
around
everybody,
forever in
nobody,
ECW.
everybody's out there doing suicide dives. Everybody's out there doing suicide dives and
Right.
Right.
planches
As soon
and
as Brock
450.
Lesnar decided to show up that he could do a moonsault and break his own neck,
neck.
everyone decided they wanted to try and do one too.
But anyways, that was huge. WCW was
And that-
whooping that ass on the ratings.
So
But
we're gonna
that
move
period
over.
of
We're
time-
gonna move over into that. We'll actually
Yeah,
use that
it
as
was
a
actually
good
kind
bridge.
of. It was smart to have you go last because it's kind of the perfect segue. Because now we're gonna kind of move into.
We're gonna move into some of the eras and
eras.
like what happened in wrestling and where things went. You guys jumped in. You and Artie jumped in later, so this was after the wars. So you guys didn't see the wars like I saw the wars.
Right.
You guys just hear about the wars. You guys might have watched some of the old pay-per-views
Yeah,
and stuff like
until a
that.
certain point, it was kind of just all like history that we could only hear about or
Right.
read about or whatever or be told about.
Living through the wars was to me one of the coolest things ever because there are people that you never knew were wrestling fans talking about wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, "Oh man, did you watch Raw last night or Nitro last night?" I'm like, "Hell yeah, I watched that. That was some of the coolest stuff ever." I mean, you had freaking Sting coming out of the damn rafters,
Right.
coming down and beating people up with a freaking baseball bat.
Right.
I mean, you had you had like you'd have a match for like the main event for the night. I don't think ever didn't get interrupted at WCW. It was always one of the NWO members would go against somebody else, and then next thing you know, the whole NWO is in there, and then the whole locker room that's WCW come out and try to help, and then Sting would just clear the freaking ring.
Right.
He'd
Yeah.
just drop out of the rafters and clear the ring.
Yeah, they basically invented that right then.
And then
in
one of some of
WCW.
my favorite stuff was they would be just doing a promo to end the show. It would be Bischoff and Hogan and the group of NWO at the time. They'd be in the ring after a match that they won or whatever, and they'd just be in there talking their promo. And freaking Sting didn't have to say a word. He didn't say a word or touch the ring for almost a year for a long period of time. You just get a spotlight on Sting holding a vulture,
Yeah.
on his arm, and just like staring down into the ring and scared everybody to death.
Right.
It was crazy. I mean,
Well,
it was just so exciting. So much stuff was going on all the time. And then the same kind of stuff was going on in WWE
well, yeah.
to
So
try to
like
Yeah, I didn't watch.
WWE turned it into a war because at first it wasn't a war; it was a slaughter. Like I said,
Yeah.
87 weeks they were getting their asses kicked by WCW, and then so they were like, okay, we got to do what they're doing. We have to kind of follow suit and make sure that we're doing things that are going to appeal to a lot of different demographics and
introduce the Attitude Era.
yeah, introduce the Attitude Era because you had to be edgy and get the teenagers and the
Stone
adult-
Cold walking around drinking beer, flipping people off, and
and
the
The beer truck.
doing what everybody wanted to do, which
beer,
was
the beer truck
sticking
was one
to
of
your
the
boss.
best things ever. Like beating up your boss.
Yeah.
Like that cage match with Vince McMahon was great.
Yep, St.
You know,
Valentine's
That was
Day
the introduction to Paul White, the Big Show,
Big Show, yeah.
coming over from WCW to WWF.
Yeah, he was the Giant.
Yeah,
he
well,
was
like-
just called the Giant in
Right.
WCW.
Another thing, you had WWE and WCW constantly stealing talents from each other.
Oh yeah, that was a big deal.
And
back
that
then.
made all the difference eventually. You know?
Yeah.
And then that one time when Degeneration X
Yeah, no, yeah, they.
camped outside of the arena
Yep,
of a WCW show
yep.
and did some
they
destructive
drove
stuff
up-
out there.
They drove up on a tank with megaphones.
Yeah.
So DX is a group, Triple H and X-Pac and
Road Dogg.
Road Dogg
Mr.
and
Ass.
yeah, Mr. Ass, Billy
And
Gunn.
China.
and then
In China.
Shawn Michaels.
A lot of
Shawn Michaels
Shawn
was
gone.
in it, but he was gone.
Yeah, he was the original DX. You had Shawn and Triple H in China. They're a big part of what started the Attitude Era.
Okay.
But the group that invaded Nitro, which is what it was referred to as was, you know, Billy Gunn and X-Pac and Triple H and
Gotcha.
Road Dogg, you know,
Everyone always forgets about Road Dogg.
in a tank, you know, with megaphones, like, and there were people outside the arena, you know, fans outside the arena. That was huge. That was a huge shot to WCW that kind of was starting to, like, okay, now people want to see us too. They're not just gonna, you know, so then
Right.
you got points where the channels are changing, you know, like, oh, okay, this is a kind of crappier segment of Raw. Let me see what's going on in WCW, or vice
Right.
versa. you
Yeah,
know?
I kind of did that for like a couple weeks, but eventually I just sort of settled on WWF
yeah,
and never bothered going back to Nitro.
right.
But I think that was mostly had to do with the period that I came in, because once I came in, I think it wasn't that long before WWF was just clearly going to win.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
for a lot of people it became pretty obvious, but I can't say that
For
for
me-
sure because I wasn't watching live
For me,
at the time.
watching it, it
Because
was when,
WWF they never really mentioned WCW anymore.
Yeah.
They didn't care. They were just doing their thing, and
well,
their
it
thing
was,
was
at
good.
that time was when Bischoff left.
Yeah, well,
That's
so,
when Bischoff left and Russo came over from WWE. It was when they literally stopped talking about each other and just tried to promote their own stuff. And
Well,
at that time, Nitro was struggling.
Well, I tell you,
They were struggling
you,
to find-
You just said, you know, WWE did a lot less of the mentioning of WCW. Even though WCW would like weekly be like, "Hey, this is what happened on Raw," because Raw wasn't live.
Yeah, they
But
would
that
yeah.
was actually one of their biggest mistakes ever, because there's a character, Mick Foley, Mankind, Cactus Jack, Dude Love, whatever. He played so many different characters, but everybody knew who he was, and
Yeah.
he was like the everyman. He's not in good shape. He's not good looking. He's just
He was such a good wrestler.
he
though.
was such a
Oh,
he was
and
just
he
a
would
regular
do-
ass dude.
He would
and
do
would-
anything for a pop.
Yeah, he would do
And that's
anything
another
for
term. That's another term. we
yeah
need to
reaction, crowd
discuss.
reaction.
A crowd reaction. A high crowd
He
reaction.
wouldn't care. He'd go out there and get his ass kicked. You know, like he lost a tooth. He got an ear ripped off by the ropes. He got thrown off the top of
He
Hell
got-
in a
he
Cell,
got- he
which
got
is like
attacked
20
through
feet
a
tall.
lip. You know,
he let The Rock hit him so many times with a chair
in
that
the
it-
head.
in the head that he had to get 30 some odd stitches in his
Yeah.
head,
It was
and that was
ridiculous.
supposed to be one chair shot.
Yeah,
And basically, he's like, just keep hitting me, it's fine.
but anyway, he was like at that point he was the crowd's ultimate like underdog babyface, as
Yeah.
opposed to like Stone Cold's like he's not the underdog. Stone Cold is not the underdog. He's just the badass everyday tough guy that
And
is going against the boss.
I still remember to this day the reaction on Triple H's face when Mankind came out and they were going to have their Hell in the Cell, and Mankind was just like, "You may not be worried about me, but I know who you are worried about." And they took off the mask and the shirt, and it was Cactus Jack stuff, and Triple H was just like, "Oh no!"
like,
And,
everybody knew it was the same guy.
It's the same guy, but it's a completely different attitude behind
And
this
yeah.
guy.
Yeah.
Foley was one of the people. He got choke slammed on the top of the Hell in a Cell, and it wasn't supposed to break, but it broke.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
fell through the Hell in a Cell
Right.
into the
That
ring.
what Undertaker did that to him. Right?
Yeah, and then
threw him off the top.
Yeah, he got thrown off the top of to the outside of the ring.
So the cell is about 20 feet high from the ground, and he got thrown off the top of this thing, went through a freaking table, and ended up underneath the barricade. Like,
oh yeah, it
but
was.
anyways,
it was crazy.
what I was going with here is like one of the biggest mistakes that WCW made was with the whole they're reading the results of what's happening on Raw before it happens because Raw wasn't live, so they were able to get leaks of what was going to happen. On a specific night, they're reading out the results. They say, "Oh, Mick Foley is going to win the WWF Championship tonight." And guess what everybody did? They changed the channel so they can watch their freaking underdog babyface win the freaking title. And that was a huge mistake because
Yeah.
their ratings
Well,
were now
if I-
from that point and from a bunch of other different things that would eventually happen.
That and they pushed.
WCW started losing.
Their other
majorly.
big mistake is by saying that they kept saying they recorded it, pushed Vince McMahon to make
Make it
Raw
live.
live.
Yep.
Yeah.
And once they pushed it to live, it was just like, okay, wait a minute. Now we have nothing to make fun of them
Yeah.
for.
Now they don't have an advantage over
Right.
us.
So then it was like, okay, this could get interesting because both shows are live. You never know what happens.
Mhm.
And like, I'm going to tell you, like, seeing a live show is way different than watching it recorded because I don't know if you guys have ever heard of the time that Buff Bagwell got his neck broken in the ring live.
Yeah.
They literally, for an hour, were afraid to move him. So they just kept going. The announcers kept talking. They kept going to the back. And they would show the medical personnel working on Buff Bagwell. It was a true injury in the ring. And they couldn't do nothing about it because it was in the ring. They couldn't just, like, get his ass out of here so we can wrestle some more. They had to slowly move him because he broke his neck.
Right.
So, I mean, there was a whole hour. I mean, that at that point, for a whole hour of watching Buff Bagwell get pulled out, they're going to, like, no. Let's go over to freaking see what's going on in WWE right now, or
Right.
WWF, and see what's going
And
to
then,
happen.
you had points like, we talked about the Big Show coming over to WCW. There was a bunch of stars that were eventually starting to leave WCW because of creative differences and everything.
So-
Backstage politics
Yeah, the
became
way-
a huge part of the success
Yeah.
of either side of the
Eventually,
of
the
war.
way I looked at it near the end of the WCW days was WCW was all the old talent,
Yeah.
and WWE was all the new talent.
Yeah.
Exactly. what
Because
it was.
that's who left WCW was the people that became new stars in WWE.
Well, I mean, Jericho moved over.
yeah, and that was huge.
Well, the thing is like, for Jericho and Guerrero and,
And I
Rey
remember,
Mysterio.
Yeah, I remember
Rey
when
Mysterio.
Rey Mysterio came over. That was a huge.
So
thing.
those three, they were cruiserweights in WCW. So they were only used in the cruiserweight stuff, the high flyers, middle of the event. So maybe hour 2 somewhere they do some cruiserweight
yeah.
stuff.
and then
They were never going to be main eventers.
the great stuff was like Rey Mysterio going up against like the Big Show and stuff, like these huge,
Right.
Yeah,
unbalanced
they did
matches.
an alright job with Rey Mysterio.
When they
but-
moved
And
over,
Guerrero did a lot of stuff in heavyweight too, though. So I mean, that was some cool stuff.
when
Yeah.
they started to move over to WWE, they were used in the main events.
Jericho's the best
Jericho-
example of that.
Yeah,
'cause-
Y2J came in as a main eventer.
Yeah, he went from being a
mid card.
mid-card, lower-card cruiserweight in WCW to literally on his debut, he interrupts The Rock and has one of the most watchable segments of the Attitude Era with The Rock. Where everybody knows The Rock, everybody knows he's got charisma for
Yeah,
days,
he's
like out
golden
the ass,
on the
mic.
And Jericho was hanging with him 100%.
Well, and that's
it was
the other thing
great
is
give and take.
The fact that Jericho was able to use his star power to make the Intercontinental Championship mean something.
Yeah,
for,
exactly.
For
Well,
a while, like
It was just an
in
enhancement,
WCW,
though,
a lot of the cruiserweights never even got mic time. So
Right.
we never knew how good Jericho was on the mic until he went to WWE.
Yep, all of a sudden he comes out.
All of a sudden, he comes out as Y2J and, like you said, stands toe to toe with The Rock. And everybody, like you said, everybody knows how good The Rock is. It's like,
Right.
whoa, he can talk?
Right.
And nobody
then
knew that.
You got another big thing, I would say as far as mid-card goes, WWE started to absolutely destroy at the later part, like talking like 99 into 2002. That was what, when I went back and rewatched some of the Attitude Era, that's what I was enjoying the hell out of. You had freaking the tag team division was starting to boom, and we haven't even talked about this yet. Nobody even remembers a damn thing about the tag team division in WCW.
they had one.
Yeah,
They did have
They
one.
would-
With,
I think.
well, I mean,
Sure,
here's the
right.
thing.
Probably.
Here's the thing: is
You
you
know,
had a
like-
couple good teams. I mean, you had the Steiners, which were
Yeah.
humongous, but the NWO broke them up.
Right.
So Scott went over
And
to
joined
the
the
NWO, and
But-
Rick
but
didn't.
you would go over to the WWE, and you had that whole 3-way war between Edge and Christian, the Dudley Boys and the Hardy Boys.
Right.
And like that was a huge what was it, the 3-way tag team ladder match,
triangle ladder match, which
oh.
then became the TLC match, tables, ladders, and chairs. You know, they were constantly raising the bar with everything they did, and everything was fresh. Yeah. Nobody had ever seen a tag team ladder match. Nobody had ever seen a 3-way tag team ladder match. And then they were like, oh, Edge and Christian uses chairs, the Dudley Boys uses tables, then the Hardy Boys use ladders. Let's throw all 3 of them in here. And then that put tag team on the map on the Attitude side, you know, because I love tag team, whether there's ladders or whatever involved.
Right. I mean,
it's one of my favorite forms of wrestling.
They had some good tag teams in WCW, but they were never utilized correctly. I mean, you had Harlem Heat, you had the Steiners, you had the Road Warriors.
Right.
Or LOD, depending on what you know them are.
Road Warriors
or Legion of Doom.
Weren't the Insane Clown Posse in WCW for a while?
They did come in during the wars. They did come in and try to do some stuff with WCW, and they did wrestle a match at a pay-per-view. But I don't remember any of that.
But, you know, like I said, around 99, you got the tag team division was booming like crazy. They were just as over and just as watchable as the main event.
Well, and then the factions. The factions that were created in the Attitude Era that became big. I mean, you had
Nation of Domination.
Yeah, the Nation of Domination. You had Degeneration X. You had, you know,
the corporation, the ministry, the corporate ministry. You know.
So the factions, because of NWO creating a faction thing in WCW, well.
There was a huge response in WWF.
There was a huge WWF created. Well, we'll create factions too. We'll do this,
right?
You know, and we'll just make it better,
right?
Well,
but you know, and then
you had you know big factions like the DX and like you were talking about the corporate, and I don't know what it was, but it was like Stone Cold would show up and just mess with all the factions.
Yeah, no, he was enemy to everyone.
And then he started off in WCW too, didn't he? When he had hair.
Yeah, he was.
He comes over and suddenly he's Stone Cold. Yeah, and he's wrecking everything.
And a lot of people don't realize that. And yes, like I said, I watched The Undertaker come in, but The Undertaker was in WCW before he was The Undertaker. He was
Undertaker
and Mark or something like that.
Undertaker and I can never remember if it's Sid Vicious or Psycho Sid, which he's both, but one of them was WWE and the other one was WCW.
Sid Vicious was WCW.
Okay, yeah. So Sid Vicious and Mean Mark Callis were like the Twin Towers. In WCW, and like you know he was just
they were humongous.
A big boring country boy, and then all of a sudden he comes to WWE and he's the freaking Undertaker.
Some of the biggest stars that made WWE what it was started off in WCW as guys who just they couldn't get a break.
Yeah, because WCW didn't have very much creative ideas or energy until you had a guy like Bischoff come in. And like there was only a certain group of people that he'd work with because, like you said, WCW was the older guys.
Yeah.
And WWE became the newer guys because all their older guys left.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, if you go back and look at it now and watch all the old ECW live shows and stuff like that, WWE's Attitude Era was pretty much ECW.
Yeah.
Like, everything they did then is what ECW was doing for years.
Yeah, and a lot of that's, like, ECW was that third organization that everyone knew about, but not a lot of people got to watch because most of their stuff was all pay-per-view or like on weird cable channels. But everyone knew who they were, and everyone always when what was it, Rob Van Dam finally came over from ECW to WWE. Everyone was super excited because he was like that one big name that they had. Yeah, and everyone wanted to watch, but not a whole lot of people had a chance to watch ECW.
ECW was a bunch of like no-name people. Nobody knew who any of these guys were unless you watched ECW, and they honestly did a fantastic job of building those people there. And then when they left, it was a huge deal. You know, when Rob Van Dam came to WWE, holy shit, this is awesome because people knew who he was, and even people that didn't gravitated to him. And then you got Taz.
You had the hardcore guys that were in WWE. You know, you had the Hollies and some of the other like the Dudleys who loved using random weapons and things. But WWE, like, it was very standard how they would go about hardcore stuff. You know, like,
Yeah.
what was it, Snow?
Yeah,
Snow
Al
and Head.
Snow.
Al Snow and Head. Yeah, but,
Yeah, Al Snow was ECW though too, wasn't
Yeah,
he?
he was.
but
And then
But
what's
not
the
for
dude that
long.
used to come out with the kendo stick all the time?
Tommy
Sandman.
Dreamer.
Dreamer.
Or Tommy Dreamer.
Dreamer, yeah.
But you also had like what was it, Steve Blackman and
Yeah.
some of the more martial art
started-
based weapon guys. And so, but when Rob Van Dam came over and started doing hardcore matches in WWE, that was a whole new level of
Yeah,
hardcore.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Between him and the Hardys and Edge and Christian and the Dudleys, they absolutely raised the bar and made hardcore wrestling what it is.
Well, yeah,
in
if you really look at WCW, even right before they folded, because a lot of this stuff happened after they folded, but there was never anything hardcore about these matches. They were just straight up matches
yeah,
that either got
Which-
interrupted or, the most hardcore thing was when Sting was coming down with a baseball bat.
Yeah, and to some people that appreciate more of an old school flavor to their wrestling, it's still a good thing. you know?
Yeah, because
for
that's exactly what it was.
I love both of it. I love all of it, but I am gonna probably appreciate the more traditional, old school, side of things. So, but yeah, ECW was a huge part of the Attitude Era / ratings war, even though they didn't really have an actual horse in the race as far as
Right.
ratings go, because they just they were the underside.
I wouldn't say it was necessarily ECW. Now that I think of it, it's more Paul Heyman.
Yeah, exactly.
Vince saw what Paul Heyman was
Heyman
doing.
did a lot of stuff, and once ECW got bought and Paul Heyman got brought over, there was a lot of really interesting things that happened.
Yeah, and
And then, like, what was it? Wasn't it around that time that they made the WWE Hardcore Championship the 24-hour rule?
yeah,
And Crash had to defend his championship 24 hours a day.
yeah, he could get pinned in the locker room. He could get pinned on a plane.
Right, people would sneak up on him while he was sleeping.
Yeah.
I remember the episode where he hired the Acolyte Protection Agency to protect him so he could
Yeah.
take a nap.
So he could finally sleep. Yeah. And yeah, they were doing edgy content really well, like, and then once the war was over, because you had Bischoff was doing a great job with creative in WCW, and then he was gone, and then Vince Russo, ex WWE creative writer, comes over and like
And
it
there's-
just became crap.
There's
Like,
a huge
immediately.
conspiracy about that too.
Yeah, there is.
If we want to get into that just slightly, is that Bischoff went over to WWE.
Eventually, yeah.
Yeah.
Not
right away, but he ended up at WWE. Russo came from WWE, and everybody says that they think that Russo came over
to
purposely
tank it.
sabotaged WCW so that the ratings would fall enough that they could buy WCW for a cheap.
And I can't blame anybody for believing that theory.
But
it doesn't matter.
because at the end of the day, just because he was the writer, everyone else had to say okay and think it was a good idea.
Well, the thing is that the owner of WCW, Turner,
Yeah,
Ted Turner, had no idea what he had. Like, he didn't know that wrestling could be lucrative until Bischoff showed him by making Nitro on Monday night. I mean,
yeah. Controversy creates cash is like Bischoff's favorite line.
Bischoff had to fight and fight and fight to get Nitro on a primetime slot
Right.
on any of the Turner networks. He had 2 of them. He could have done it on any network. And it's
Yeah.
like, just give me one on a primetime night. And it's like, as a matter of fact, let me have Monday night to fight directly with our competitor. And it took a while. Finally, Turner gave in and gave him the slot and realized that, holy crap, this is lucrative.
Yeah.
I'm making a ton of freaking money off of this, and I have no idea why. But you
Yeah,
know what?
'cause
Turner just cares about cash.
Yeah, he didn't know what he was doing. He
had
just
no
knew
idea
that
what
he
he
had
was-
somebody that was making it good for him. And
Right.
then,
and he
Bischoff's
leaned on
gone.
Bischoff. He leaned on Bischoff a lot
Yeah.
during that.
Bischoff eventually leaves, and then they bring in Vince Russo from WWE, and like everything that WCW was doing at that point was just crap.
Oh yeah, because the NWO wasn't quite what it was anymore, and I think the NWO had basically at that point had just It has run its course.
Run its course.
It has run its course.
definitely.
There was nothing left there. Sting was still Dark Sting, but
There
was a lot of crap within
they
that
started-
really started
yeah.
to turn when they split the NWO into two factions.
Yeah, they made it like
The
the
Wolfpack
Wolfpack
and the
NWO,
black and the white.
where there was like a good NWO and a bad NWO,
Yeah, I
like
mean-
Civil War. Like it became dumb.
And Sting sold out and went to the Wolfpack, and he
Right.
stopped painting his face black and white and started painting it red and black.
Right.
I mean, that's where, like, in his later years, he had that little bit of red just to homage to
Yeah, to the Wolfpack.
the Wolfpack. But I mean,
And it's like the execution was just bad on that. It's not necessarily a bad idea to do that. It's just the way they went about it.
yeah, it
In a
was,
way, they went about everything for the last like year.
Speaking of bad execution, I'd like to get into how I got out of wrestling.
Okay.
And
We can talk about that.
it was a bit of bad execution because we talked earlier about Steve Austin doing the beer truck and coming in and spraying down everybody with the beer truck. When WWE started recycling their successful
Are you talking about
storylines,
the milk truck.
talking about the milk truck.
Okay, hold on
Okay.
now. We're gonna have a problem. 'cause
Yeah, hold on.
Kurt Angle's amazing. Don't make.
Okay, Kurt Angle coming in with the milk truck. Once that happened, it was too obvious that they were recycling stories.
Yeah.
Because Kurt Angle had a lot of potential, and he did a lot of cool storylines before that, and after, honestly. But once they got to the buyout with WCW, and they had Stone Cold switch over and sing country songs out of key and be an idiot, I was just done. I was like, you just took one of your most compelling characters and made him just kind of weird and dumb.
So that's actually perfect to probably transition into the next episode, because now we're kind of getting closer to the end of the
Yeah, we're getting more
Attitude Era and into
closer to modern. Yeah.
into Ruthless Aggression, which is
That's-
perfect that you said that, because I've been wanting to talk about this basically the
okay,
entire
so
time.
we're
Plus,
gonna go
I
ahead
need,
and
I need
end
to
this.
get another beer. So
Are you
We're gonna
sure
go
about
ahead
that?
and end this, and then
Speaking of bad execution, have you seen Dragon